In January 2022, Marcus Rashford hit his absolute rock bottom. After possibly the worst 6 months of his career, he put in a performance so bad during an FA Cup tie, it caused many Man United fans to turn on him. I was watching this game live on TV, and there was one moment that was just inexcusable. After a teammate had a shot saved by Aston Villa's Emi Martinez, the ball scrambles loose. And even though Rashford may not have the best chance of getting to the rebound first, for some reason, he just gives up. He stands dead on his heels and turns away from the ball before Martinez has even picked it up. There's an audible groan from the home fans in Old Trafford because, irrespective of how the team is performing, as a Man United player, there is no excuse not to try. The images of Rashford on the bench minutes later after being substitute don't even need describing. It led many to question, including myself, whether Rashford was finished. Was he just destined to become wasted potential? Someone whose career highlight at 24 was scoring a last-minute penalty in a round of 16 Champions League tie. Fast forward a year later, and Marcus Rashford is playing the football of his life. He's Man United star man as the team looks rejuvenated under Erik ten Hag. He's banging in goals for fun and was England's top goal scorer at the World Cup. But what has fueled this redemption? Because his talents and football ability haven't changed. Something else has, and that's his mindset. So let's unpick the psychology of Marcus Rashford's redemption. Now, for the first few years of his career, Marcus Rashford had a fairly steady trajectory. He burst onto the scene scoring 4 goals in his first 2 games at just 18, leading immediate comparisons to the likes of Wayne Rooney. But the problem is, he's typically been performing in an underperforming team, and he's constantly been shifted around into different positions from various managers who've tried to use him in different ways. And after a few years of not really seeing the progress or development he would have liked, that's naturally going to eat away at his confidence. I remember there was a time about 4 or 5 years ago that Rashford was being compared with Mbappe. And as much as the top pros like to think of their only competition as themselves, even those with smaller egos will not be able to completely avoid making those comparisons. You need competition as a reference point to keep pushing yourself. And for Rashford to see Mbappe get exponentially better and better, whereas he's just potted along for a few years, that would have eaten away at his self-belief. And another factor that would have damaged Rashford's self-belief is other aspects of other people's opinions. So during the pandemic, he led an amazing campaign fighting against child food poverty, where he used his platform to take on the government and get major retailers to partner together to provide meals for the poorest during the biggest health crisis seen in 100 years. On the one hand, he was applauded by the vast majority of people for this work, but there was also a louder minority, using this as an excuse to abuse him, claiming that he should just focus on football, that he was only doing it for his public image, and that an athlete's job is not to get involved in politics. And naturally, because of this extra work he was doing off the pitch, more scrutiny was placed on his performances on it. And so when he then started playing worse, more and more people started questioning whether he was distracted by his charity work. And that is actually a fair question to ask because of the impact that mental fatigue can have on physical performance. A 2010 study by Samuel Makora found that athletes given tough mental puzzles to do before an endurance task were quicker to become physically exhausted than athletes who didn't have to do mental puzzles. The key takeaway here is that being mentally fatigued makes physical activity feel a lot harder to do than it should. And the work that Rashford was doing would have been mentally exhausting. It wasn't some fun side hustle of starting a clothing label that a lot of athletes do. It was a serious social issue where people's health and in extreme cases lives could be at risk. So this charity work may have not necessarily been a distraction, but it would have been a significant drainer on Rashford's energy. And in turn, that would have potentially fueled some of those bad performances he then started putting in. And then months of this were then followed by Man United losing the 2021 Europa League final. And then the straw that broke the camel's back would have been Rashford missing a crucial penalty in the Euro 2020 final against Italy. Due to this miss, he was racially abused on social media, and a mural of him in Manchester was defaced. And if you think about it, here was a guy who spent so much of his time and energy lifting up other people who truly needed it. And then in his time of need, when he really needed lifting up, he then suffers the worst, most vile form of abuse imaginable. I think that's going to break anyone. And the entire next season after that penalty miss, you could see that Rashford was a broken man. He had lost his love of the game. His body language was atrocious. He completely checked out both mentally and physically. And I'll even hold my hands up and say I thought he was done. After the disaster of the 2021-22 season, when Man United were in an absolute crisis after sacking Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and bringing in the footballing fraud known as Ralf Rangnick, Rashford finally had a proper summer break to reset both mentally and physically in order to plot his comeback. Deep down, Rashford would have been embarrassed by his total of 5 goals that season, his lowest tally ever. So, he got to work. In July 2022, he said he had benefited from a priceless pre-season. He said, "I've had time to break, rest and recover both mentally and physically. And for anyone suffering from a lack of self-confidence, a proper break is often the best remedy. And that doesn't mean going on holiday to sip cocktails. I mean a break from the norm, the routines and the same environment. This allows a complete system reset, starting from scratch, and you can slowly start building up that self-assurance again. Rashford spent his entire summer on himself, going to Nike's headquarters to work with elite conditioning coaches and leaving the charity work at home to his family to take care of. And that too is sometimes the reality of turning things around. You have to put yourself 100% first and be a bit selfish. It's why the likes of Ronaldo, Tiger Woods and LeBron have been so dominant for so long. Everything in their lives revolves around them and their performance. So there is a right way about being selfish, as long as you're spending your time, effort and energy on things that are actually going to improve your performance and allow you to perform when it really counts. When the 2022-23 season started, Rashford and his Man United teammates took a bit of a while to get into their stride after a couple of embarrassing losses against Brighton and Brentford. But the turning point for Rashford was scoring in the win against Liverpool, along with another 2 goals against Arsenal. Finally, there was emotion on the pitch when he played. There was energy. The contrast in his body language was crazy. These performances Rashford put in could be called keystone performances, which basically means they act as the first domino that you desperately need to fall, because they can then create momentum and act as the foundations of a good run in form. If you perform well in the biggest games or matches, then you realise that on your day, you can beat anyone. So having 2 amazing performances against 2 top teams would have been the ignition point for Rashford after he'd spent the summer refueling his tank. His system reset had been successful, and although he took a little bit of a while to get going, he hit form just at the right time before the World Cup. And it was in Qatar that he was able to fully redeem himself to the rest of the country through scoring 3 goals at that World Cup. He had more than done his part to exercise his demons from the Euro 2025. Since then, he's looked a man possessed. Every ball is chased, there's a smile on his face. He finally looks like living up to his potential. And after every goal scored, he now points to the thing that ultimately led to his fall, but has also led to his return.